What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the North Leeds Jitz podcast. This week's special episode of the show, I'm at GBUware UK with Professor Simon Ling.
Hello.
And Simon wears many hats for Gracie Baha, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you know what are the headline titles for work things you do?
So I look after GBUware. So I'm the operations manager of GBUware. I think I'm called project manager for GB Jiu-Jitsu, but I look after GB Jiu-Jitsu here in the UK and Ireland as well. And then GB Events. I don't have a title there. I just look after GB Events.
Just as a guy.
Yeah, it's predominantly now CompNet focused. It is where most of my energy goes, but we have some camps and other things that come under that banner. But luckily, I have some very good people around that look after us with that. And then I look after Gracie Baha Arnold as well. So yeah.
And a lot of the schools in the UK will come to you for advice and assistance.
Yeah.
Kind of why we're down here today, just looking to get some more knowledge about the wider GB community and get better ties with Professor Simon down here in his school in GB Arnold.
Yeah.
And take me way back then. Like, what was your first interaction with Jiu-Jitsu?
This is kind of a bit of a funny story because my brother is very competitive. We were always sort of competitive with each other, whether it was, whatever sport we played. And he started training jiu-jitsu in secret. Didn't let me know about it, but it got to the point where he wanted someone to be able to train with when he wasn't in the jiu-jitsu school.
How old were you guys at this point?
Oh, I mean, he was in his late 20s. I was in my early 30s. So when would this be? 2009, early 2010, maybe 2009. And so my brother had cancer, right? And the reason I bring this up was the way in which he broke the news to me about training jiu-jitsu, because he said, "Oh, Simon, I've got something really important that I need to talk to you about. Can you come through and sit to my office?" And the first thing that comes through my head is, "Oh no, he's going to give me some bad news. This is, maybe the cancer's back or something." And he sits me back down and he tells me, "I've started training jiu-jitsu, but I didn't want to tell you. I've been training for 6 months." I was just massively relieved, to be perfectly honest. And he couldn't understand why I was so annoyed at him. But yeah, he had like a couple of gis in his wardrobe. I ended up taking one of those. And so the first experience for me is he had the GB1 DVDs that were out at that time. I think it was Marcia Fatoza with a very short haircut doing those. And it was like the 16-week curriculum of what the GB1 was. I don't know, maybe version 2, version 3, something like that. And that's what we started training with. So we'd sit there and watch the DVDs and he'd train. Meanwhile, he was going off to train at a school in Long Eaton. And I was just training with him at the weekends and stuff like that. And then he just kept pushing me, wanting me to get more involved. I ended up starting in the US in 2010. So there's a chap called Rosendo Diaz, who's a Hoyler Gracie black belt, and he had a third generation jiu-jitsu in Pennsylvania, just near where my parents lived. And I started training there. And I did a short period of time there, came back to the UK and started in Long Eaton, trained there. And then, met Victor early part of 2011. So he had his school in Mansfield at this time. And he came down and did a seminar. And the result of that seminar, I just wanted to kind of learn more from him. So I popped up to the Mansfield school a couple of times. And then he came back again later on in 2011. And by this point, he was now in Nottingham just before the first Nottingham school opened. And he was at a place called the School of Black Belts, which was in the centre of the city of Nottingham. And I just wanted to be able to learn from him. So I ended up, I lived in the city, so it was a 5-minute walk to his school. And at the time they were rebuilding all the tram here in Nottingham. So what had been a 30-minute drive to Long Eaton had turned into like an hour plus.
All right.
And I ended up, with a heavy heart saying to those guys, it's time for me to move on. And that's how I ended up at Gracie Baha Nottingham. So when the doors opened to the first school in the April of 2012, I was there as is one of the founders of the school.
Wow, and what belt? Well, were you still a white belt? Were you a blue belt?
The opening ceremony, I got my blue belt.
Oh, very cool.
I mean, it was so the relationship with Victor and the guys in Long Eaton was quite close. Victor didn't want to step on any toes. I was training at both locations at the same time for an extended period of time. I'd do a couple of days in Long Eaton, a couple of days with Victor. So when I got the blue belt, the guy called Mikey Dean, who's the professor at the head professor in Long Eaton, he was there on the mats and he saw it and get the blue belt. Gave Braulio Estima a huge hug. He didn't have a clue who I was, looked slightly weirded out by the whole experience. Still does actually when I hug him, to be fair. And that was it. So that was all. So pretty much by the April, I forget whether it was April or May or June, I can't remember, 2012, that was me. I was a blue belt and I was training at Nottingham. What
was the general state of jiu-jitsu in the UK around that time? Like, does it feel a lot different then than it does now?
Yeah. I mean, the way I started was very different. I mean, obviously, every school's different. Gracie Barra has one way of doing things. Other teams have different ways of doing things. But I think, for me, you had to be quite a stubborn individual. You had to put up with a lot of injuries and just being thrown to the wall, so to speak. And it was very full on. And very, very much more of a sort of fight culture. I think now things have changed an awful lot in that respect. I think, if I look at my school, the types of people that my school attracts now is very different to the group of people, I think, that started back in the old days. And, you get doctors, you're getting doctors on the mats, you're getting, PhD peoples, people that have done well in careers and everything else, and a whole range of people and a whole range of ages as well. So, I'm sitting here at 48 now and still training, and I'll get people walking in at a similar sort of age to me. And there's this thing about, am I too old? And the answer is always no.
Yeah.
But I think it's become a lot more accessible as a sport to people and a lot safer as a sport, which has welcomed a lot more people to it. And I think that's a really positive thing. Like I said, back in the old days, you just had to be stubborn.
Yeah, I think it constantly, it shouldn't, but it always does surprise me, the importance of safety within the school and how important it is to new people coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime we're running like some market research around like what was the biggest barriers to stop you from doing your first class, the amount of times injury comes up, like it's like, wow, like people are like very concerned about getting injured, much higher than maybe I would. And obviously we all have our own personal biases. So like I have been in martial arts since I was 5 years old, so I don't really think of it as like if you ask me to go play football, I'm like, nah, I don't want to get injured kind of thing. Like, but in terms of jumping into martial arts, I never really think of it in that context. But it is always, like I say, surprising to know how many people that is the barrier to entry for a lot of people.
I think it can be, I mean, I've, over the years, working full time in the academy, which I did for a very long time, you get people walking into the academy and you could see them, you could feel the nervous energy. I've even had to fill out the kind of, the intro class form for people because they were shaking too much to be able to even fill it in. And I think for a lot of people, just having the courage to walk through the door is a huge first step. And then there's this kind of artificial barrier, this friction from them, making a first contact is one thing, but walking through the door. And I think people don't know what to expect. And, maybe they've seen things online, maybe they're influenced by, what they've seen on TV and things like that. And they think of us as something we're not. We're actually obviously a very welcoming place. And the reality is, in terms of injury rates, most of my students get injured doing other sports or at work than they do in the academy. And, when it comes to kids getting injured, our rate is next to zero. But when it's rugby and football and everything else, the amount of emails we get from parents saying, I'm sorry, my son's going to have 2 or 3 months off because they've broken their arm playing rugby or something like that, where it just doesn't happen on our mats.
And the injuries that you do get tend to be somewhat minor in jiu-jitsu, but, like you play, we've got one of the kids who works on the front desk for us, Johnny, he's had his ankle broken for the last 8 weeks, still in a boot. And playing rugby, and he was training jiu-jitsu, many times a week, and it's rugby that did him in. So,
but it takes a different approach. I mean, the thought, thinking about safety, and it's become a over the last few years in Gracie Barra, it's become very much on the fore of the thinking as well. So it's things like that, even some of the practices we have where we number students 1, 2, 3, and we get them to do specific training, that instantly creates a level of risk. And, we can't remove risk from what we do altogether. At the end of the day, we're doing a martial art, but you've always got to be thinking about how you manage risk. And the little decisions that you can make can have that big impact. It could be that you have 2 big 100+ kilo guys that are a bit fiery, and by partnering them up for a round, you've taken a risk by putting those 2 people together, where one of those guys with a smaller opponent might behave in a completely different manner. And so that approach to risk is something that I've had to work with my staff a lot, because we have to accept that there is risk. We can't completely mitigate it, otherwise we're not training jiu-jitsu. But it's all about how you manage those risks. So it comes down to how you partner people up, and how you deal with specific training, how you partner people up for sparring, and how you deal with, whether we're doing stand-up sparring on the ground. All those little things are all you managing risk within the organization. And it takes some thought, and it takes experience as well.
On the development things, how do you feel GB's changed from being a student in the early days to now, 10, 13, however many years later, to being in and at near the top of the organisation?
I think for a long time, safety is being considered. The ICP as a program for teaching people was a big part of the cornerstone of that. And, from things like the GB warm-up, to the partnering of students. And the thing is, this is something that's been around for a long time. I can remember, I was quite lucky to have found Victor. Just so happened, he opened a school a couple of miles from my house, and kind of the rest is history. But he was very influenced about what he saw happening in the United States. He was there a lot competing. He was connected with senior people in the organization and people that were trying to set a standard for the team and bring this through the instructor certification program. And so Victor came back and had a very different approach. And so right the way through, Victor was was always the person on the mats when he was teaching, and the other leaders within the school, partnering people up to train, partnering people up to spar, and just those things alone make a massive difference to your school. But it also addresses other issues. It's not just risk. It's very easy for social subsets to sort of cliques to sort of appear in a school. The second you let the students partner themselves up, you're creating that environment where friends always come together, other people are marginalized. And, I was having a conversation with my wife over the weekend, and school will remain nameless, but she travels a lot, with her work, and she visits schools. And being put in that situation as a purple belt woman, where you're not getting rounds because people don't want to spar with you, and you're having to almost force the situation with people because it's not being managed. And this is the sort of stuff that can happen. So it becomes much more beyond risk. It becomes much more about trying to manage a culture, create a good culture and quality within the environment.
And you think GB as an organisation has changed a lot in that time as well? With culturally, have you seen changes in those years as well?
Yeah. I think the cornerstones around safety have been there for a long time, but it's definitely come to the fore. The last 2 years, a huge amount of work and effort has been put into safety. From the blogs that the organisation produces, the additional information that's being put into our instructor certification program, introducing ethics processes and procedures, which are not just there to deal with, sort of difficult situations. They're there to deal with safety issues, and people might not feel empowered. You never know what kind of culture you're going to have within your school. You might have an instructor who doesn't take criticism very well, but there might be a significant safety risk in the school in some way, shape, or form. And allowing students to have a voice, allowing people to have a voice, and to let the organisation know so it can work and work with schools to help them improve and help them manage safety, I think is very important. At the end of the day, Gracie Barr would be nothing without the schools, but the schools would be nothing without the students. And so a good student experience is really important, and an inclusive student experience. And I think this is all part of what this is about. So, one of the things that has been done at a more central level in Gracie Barr has been about the work that we've done around safety and ethics. I was brought in the summer last year to be part of that team. I've been working in that team almost for a year now, which is kind of frightening. And one of the things that I've done is, piloting some of these things. So we have a safety poster. It's available through the ICP. I now have it up in the changing rooms in my school. So if anyone ever sees anything or they want to report anything, it's there. And that goes centrally to Gracie Barr. And my hope is if there's ever something reported, that I can work with the team and make sure my school's doing things in the right way.
It's amazing. So tell me a bit more about your journey in jiu-jitsu. You're training with Victor, early days. What's that like?
Obviously, you're with Mike. I used to see Mike a lot. I used to see a lot of people from around the place a lot. What Victor did is he just was like a magnet, and he brought people together. It didn't feel like a normal school. We had the local people that would come through and train. You'd have your GB1 students, GB2 students and kids and everything else. But the school attracted people from all over the country. So, there was a chap called Gaz Murphy who's based up in Middlesbrough. He used to get in his car and drive all the way down to attend Monday night classes. And he'd be there every week on a Monday night. Goodness knows what time of night he was getting home after classes in the evening. You had people like Ollie Lovell and Jamie Paxman that were travelling down from Yorkshire. And there was a whole group of people in the room that were not from Nottingham, but were Gracie Barr Nottingham students who were in the fabric of that school. Some people were there every day. And so there was a kind of, it drew people together. And that's how, how the Nottingham competition team came around. And that group of people changed. They developed in the match with Victor. They went out and competed, but then a lot of them became, Gracie Barr school owners in their own right, set up their own schools, and then were coming in the daytime and coming to train in the competition training. And it all started then when that Gracie Barr Nottingham was first opened in 2012. They were all part of the fabric. So, if I think about Arnold or, the situation you guys would have been around here, when you open a school on the first day, you might inherit a couple of people. There might be a few kids you inherit, a few adults that might have belts. But for the most part, it's a sea of brand new people that you're there to grow and develop over a period of time. And that's normal. Arnold went through that. When I took over the project in that school, it was a sea of white belts. And I had a couple of kids that were Nottingham kids that lived in Arnold that ended up training at Arnold, and we had a few grey and white belts and grey belts. But for the most part, it was a sea of white belts. Nottingham was not that. There was brown belts and purple belts and blue belts on the mat right from the day it started because of because people gravitated towards Victor to train with him. And I think it's been replicated in Brasa de Prata as well. That school's acted as a bit of a magnet for people to come together. Yeah. And I think they're up to running competition training 5 mornings a week or something. And, whenever I pop in, there's black belts everywhere. And it's nice to see black belts my own age as well. So I get a bit of training with people my own age instead of people getting beaten up by what I call the kids, but probably some of them are in their 30s now. But, so it was, I felt very lucky being in that environment and being part of that environment and seeing what those guys achieved as a group, Victor's, podiums in major competitions, but then the whole group of people around them that all achieved some amazing results out there in competition, and I got to share the mats with them. Yeah.
Did you have any wobbles in your own journey? Any times you were like...
all the time. I'm going to tell you this story because, it's a sort of story that Victor would tell you anyway. So, I took it seriously. I was there almost every day, training, very understanding partner, but also very career orientated. So, we had a way of managing through these things. And so I was there all the time. And I just remember we were doing, it was like a turtle attack where you had to catch their arm between your legs and you kind of rolled into like a Kimura position and like a crucifix. And I got it the first couple of times, but then after that, I could not repeat it and not do it again. And I basically ended up having what we will commonly refer to as a paddy. And I tried to throw off my gi jacket and just storm off the mats, but it got stuck on the end of my arm. And before I knew it, I was swinging that thing around like a helicopter. And it fired halfway across the mats, and I stormed out the room feeling like an absolute idiot. So yeah, I've had some wobbles. Yeah. But then the other wobbles are just like anyone else's. I think, when you're in that training room, you get told not to compare yourself against other people, but it's very hard not to. I think that's a bit of human nature. And, you have ups and downs, good days and bad days. If you've had a stressful day in the office, you're probably not going to perform as well when you're training, and we go through ups and downs. And, there were times that I thought about stopping and thought about quitting. I thought about quitting as a black belt, for goodness sake, but, it's about having that conversation with yourself. And because nothing in life is easy. And if you want something, you've got to work for it. And you're going to have down days, you're going to have ups, you're going to have downs. And on the down days, it's about just pulling yourself up and trying to keep moving forward. And I think every single belt wobbles at every single belt. Definitely days where I didn't want to go. I used to live quite a way out. I ended up moving a bit further out of Nottingham, a bit further north. And I used to work from home. So the argument I used to have with myself, the inner monologue based argument, where I'd argue my way all the way through packing my bag. I'd argue all the way through leaving the house. And sometimes I'd actually leave the house and then go back into the house while I was having this argument because I didn't want to go. I just wanted to sit at home. And then for me, there was a moment. I get in the car. There was a few different ways back to my village, but sometimes I'd actually get in the car, drive out, and then I'd go back around the circle and come back home and park. But there was a roundabout just outside of Arnold. And if I got to that roundabout, I was going to go the rest of the route. Mm. But some days, honestly, that inner argument I'd have because I was tired and I didn't really feel like it, but I knew I had to do it. And there were some weeks where I probably had that argument 2 or 3 times a week for a month, but often I managed to win. Right. And that's what kept me going.
Nice. At what point did you teach your first jiu-jitsu class?
So I was a purple belt. I can't remember if there was anything before purple because the guys used to disappear to the World Championships a lot.
Right. They're like,
just en masse and leave me and Professor Ghazi kind of and a couple of other stragglers behind. And they just go en masse as a group and they were literally the entire coaching staff and Ghazi would go. And I'm sure I had to help out with a couple of kids' classes, but where I really remember it is I'd had a bit of a freak sort of knee injury. Just pulled my MCL, but what I found out later is it started tearing my meniscus and I had no idea. That then came back to bite me in the bum about 2 years later. But, so I was a purple belt and I wasn't able to compete at that time, but wanted to find an outlet. And so Victor, we ended up having a conversation. I ended up starting to teach GB1 classes. So we had a late night GB1 class on a Tuesday and Thursday night, and I'd stick around and teach those. And that became my regular, I guess, teaching gig as a purple belt. Mm. And I carried on doing that all the way through until I left to take over the project in Arnold. Occasionally have to teach kids. Wasn't a fan of it to begin with. I've kind of taken to it since, but occasionally, but it was the same. When the team went, it would be the Abu Dhabi World Pro, it would be the World Championships. They went, or they'd go en masse, and so you'd end up helping pick up the slack with the teaching, and that's kind of how it went. But then I also stepped in at the University of Nottingham as well, so I used to teach there Friday nights, and I did that for about 2 years, I think, 2 academic years. I did that for them before, again, once I took over my own school, I didn't have the capacity to do that anymore.
And how did teaching jiu-jitsu change your relationship with jiu-jitsu?
It was an interesting one. I'd find it sneaking into my training because I'd spend so much time studying it and trying to be the best instructor I could be. And it's difficult when you've got people like Victor and Ghazi there as instructors that very often I was always teaching the last GB1 classes of the part A and part B, being a Tuesday night and Thursday night. And I'd always have, well, Victor does it like this, and well, Guzzy does it. I'm like, I'm sure they do. And me as a purple belt, with these multiple degree black belts. But anyway, but it was just what it was. And but I found that I brought it in to my training, because the way I teach an armbar or something, and then the things that I'd be working on and the details I'd be expressing to the students, I'd then find sneaking in. I think where it really came into its own was when I was teaching every day. So when I had the school and I was teaching, I wanted to make sure that the quality of what I was doing was of a high level. So I'd always sit there on a Sunday, a Saturday or Sunday, and review what I was going to teach during the week. But sometimes I was having to go outside of my comfort zone. When you're sitting there with a curriculum where you've got to do flipping foot throws, which are probably, I think, for me, like the hardest thing I find to do, and leg grabs and hip throws, and you want to get it smooth and you want to be able to teach people in a good way. That was a challenge. And so actually it was the comp training on a Monday morning. We'd have 2 hours of comp training. Victor very often would make us drill. So we'd do stand-up drills, and I would stand-up drill what I was teaching that week. And then Victor would come around and correct me and help me out. And by the time I went in that night to teach whatever takedown I was going to teach, I'd repped it out and I felt confident in it. And I felt capable of teaching it to them. And I also found that these things, came into my game. Every so often I'll see something or I'll teach something and it'll be a bit of a blast from the past. And then for the next couple of weeks, I just see it everywhere, and it's kind of what I'm doing before the next shiny thing takes my fancy. So it definitely has helped an awful lot. And I found just the confidence with teaching brought a level of confidence to the training as well, I felt.
And did you open GB Arnold before or after you got involved with GB, kind of behind the scenes stuff?
It all kind of happened at once. So Victor was the one that opened the school. So Arnold was his project that he started. So the doors opened. There's folklore around it, but we'll say it was the 4th of April, 2016, because that's the day the first classes happened. I think the doors were open a couple of days before they did open day and stuff. But the first of them, I think it was Monday the 4th. I think it was Monday. And so the school ran for 2016. And then I'd been doing a startup and things had not gone, startups are a difficult thing to do. And this one hadn't worked out. And I came into sort of a comp training session and sort of told Victor's wife, Joanna, that the startup had finished and that I didn't know what I was going to do. And I think she'd had a chat with Victor and they thought, oh, we know what you can do. And so I ended up meeting with them a few times, agreed to take on the school and run the project. And that was that. So that, I think we agreed in the December, and then I came on board and actually started doing things in the January. But that coincided with Victor asking me if I'd also get involved in helping with GB Jiu-Jitsu. So that's when I stepped in. And I originally started helping. So it was it was that January of 2017 is when I started. And at that time it was helping them with GB Jiu-Jitsu specifically. That's where I was. So GB Wear was something that was being run out of Birmingham at the time. GB events didn't really exist. And so that's when I first got involved, yeah.
Amazing. And then did that, well, I guess there's two questions. Did being a school owner change your relationship to Jiu-Jitsu again? And did working for GB change your relationship with Jiu-Jitsu?
I had to, the learning curve, running a school, the learning curve was significant. I knew how to run businesses. I'd done it for years and years and years. So that side of it didn't scare me. But the challenge of running a jiu-jitsu school, having to grow the school, having to, I've got all these people that were now depending on me, their growth, their development, trying to build a community, trying to bring people together, managing the highs and lows. In that first, during that first period of time, you put your heart and soul into things, and then someone turns around and goes, I don't really feel like training anymore. And you're just like, it felt like a little bit of knife in the heart on a repeated basis at the beginning. And you kind of take everything almost personally.
Well, especially when it's a student that you've invested so much in them. I remember the first time it happened to me, it was two kids, brothers, and they'd been there since day one. And we'd have great banter together on the mats. And it's we're just going to do football now. It's no, don't leave. You guys are so good, you know.
And then this is, after a while, you have to become hardened to it, get used to it. And this is a conversation I've had with a lot of people. And it's like, you can't be jaded. You have to, at the end of the day, the people that are in the school, that are training the kids, the adults, parents, you've got to give them 100% of what you've got. But you've got to find a coping mechanism, how you can, when people leave, how you can let them go. Because it's like remorse. It's like suffering with, like the loss, like the loss of someone important in your life, like a death almost in some cases. And you can't, in order to be able to keep investing in people, you can't feel that. You've got to try to find a way of getting through. And I guess you get a lot of practice with it. So this is it. So I think that was probably the thing that changed me. As a coach, I changed. My way of teaching completely changed over the years. And the pandemic took a massive change in the way I teach. I was much more of a disciplinarian, much more direct when I first started teaching, not so much with the adults, but with the kids. And now I'm very different. My approach to the kids is a lot different now. I'm a lot more relaxed. And at the end of the day, so many of these kids, especially kids in the comp team and the advanced kids, they're there because they want to be there. They don't need to be given this sergeant major line anymore. And so I think it very much changed. But also, the increase in my understanding of jiu-jitsu as well, and the mental side of what goes on, what it takes to motivate people and help people and support people along. All of those, and the things that people go through, I think because we've been on the journey ourselves, we can impart a lot of that to people. But it's being a lot more aware, I guess. I think I became a lot more aware of the people around me, the struggles that they were having, trying to preempt some of the issues just from being around them and feeling that that's probably the big thing. I think from a GB Jiu-Jitsu side, there's, I think you're with like-minded people. So at the end of the day, sometimes you can feel very isolated running a school because you can't talk to the students about what you're going through, because at the end of the day, they're there to experience jiu-jitsu and have a good time. They don't need to know that you're having an argument with the electricity company and someone's stealing the electric, or that there's a problem with the landlord and they won't fix it, or whatever it is, right? That's not your student's problem. They're there to enjoy jiu-jitsu and have a great time. They're not there to hear about your woes. And sometimes it can be quite isolating. And I think when you're surrounded by a group of other people that are school owners that are on, again, a similar journey, some of them that have been on the journey for 20 years, some of them that are just starting the journey, you're on it together, and the kind of camaraderie that you have, the common issues that you have, the things that you can talk about. I think as time's gone on, my interactions with people, I'm still constantly learning from the things I hear that school owners do. And then I'm able to impart my experience along with the things I hear to try to help other people as well. And so that's been quite a rewarding experience.
I kind of find that as a coach sometimes, like, I get to learn, you kind of get into this weird spot where you learn a lot from the students in the room, because a student, say me and you are drilling, you can learn from your experience, you can learn from my experience. But I get to, as a coach in the room, I can learn from everyone in the room's experience. They get to see how everyone's doing their particular technique. Sounds like a similar kind of thing there. It's, do you think, is there something you wish school owners could better understand around Gracie Barra?
I think there's a huge amount of work that's gone into trying to give school owners a blueprint, or to give them a real big step up. And I think to embrace that approach and that way of doing things, I think there's so many advantages to it. People might disagree with me, but for me, what I've found is I've tried to make my school almost like a blueprint of how things are supposed to be done, because I feel like there's a spotlight on me. People are looking at me and they're watching me and they're watching my school. And so, obviously we have limitations. My school's in quite a small location. We only have so many hours in the day, et cetera, et cetera. But we've tried to do everything we can to implement the ICP the best we can. This year will be the first year that I've managed to get every single coach from blue belt, 16-year-old blue belt, all the way through to the black belts, all ICP certified in the same year at the same time, which is incredibly difficult, you can imagine, especially when you're trying to corral people trying to do GCSEs and A-levels.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's that new program, but the way they do the ICP now, where you can kind of buy it for like, you pay one kind of fixed fee for as many coaches as you need. Seemed like such a smart way to do it.
So that's what we did. So when that was released, that gave me the first opportunity to do it, because it was always, from a cash flow standpoint, it was very, very, very painful in October to buy all of those at once. So it's opened the door for us and allowed us to do it. But even things like, the variations in the kids warm up, we've implemented those, and instantly life's got easier.
Yeah.
The warm-ups are slightly shorter. You can fit more into the class. It doesn't feel so rushed. There's just so many aspects of the ICP that we've tried to make work. Obviously, we put our own flavor on things, the games that we do with the kids and one thing and another. But I found that so many issues have been avoided because of those programs. And so this is one of those things, for example, long-term commitment to things like the word of the week. So we have the instructor's code of conduct. The phrases are there. Building that in gives you, and having the kids engaging with that. The parents, see that we're trying to impart, knowledge and long-term investment in what, in behavior. We're able then to use those words to help us manage behavior on the mats and issues that we deal with. And it means that there's so many issues within the school that don't exist anymore because of that investment in time in the word of the week and that side of things. The approach that we take to partnering people up for the classes and all these elements that make up the ICP have made our life in the academy so much easier. It means it's a much friendlier place to be. People are having a lot better experience within the academy. We're not ending up with little cliques there. It's become a big, friendly, and strong experience. And we've not had to reinvent the wheel. We've just embraced the way of doing it, because people behind the scenes have invested their lives into trying to continue to grow and develop it. One thing that's been really interesting in the last one, and it's what I spent a lot of time with some of my staff with, was they got child psychologists in, and they looked at children's approaches to teaching and the fact that children aren't a blank canvas, and they'll turn up to school with baggage like anyone else does, but they're a child, and how they handle and how they deal with that baggage can be different. So how that child's going to learn that day, how they're going to behave that day, and is going to be different. And there was some really good stuff there that I was able to work with my coaching staff, because, some kids have just woken up. They've been asleep for half an hour on the way into the academy, and they've just been thrust in the doors of academy, and they're expected to take part in a jiu-jitsu class. I'm not entirely sure where they are. So I found the embracing of the ICP within the school has been incredibly helpful. We still have problems like any other school. We still have issues that we have to resolve, but that in itself has been hugely beneficial.
It's so funny that if you think about a person as an instructor, probably the first thing you think of is, the belt rank. Mm-hmm. But then I think there's so much that goes into being an instructor that is not to do with your ability in terms of jiu-jitsu. It's like, I see my ability in terms of like how well I would do in a competition, super different to like how well I can teach a room full of kids, or a room full of adults, or even one particular technique. So so much goes into being a good coach. And I think the ICP does a really good job of getting coaches ready to hold in a room like that. I'm a big fan of the ICP. If you had a magic wand and we made you Master Carlos for the day, what would you change in either GB worldwide or in the ICP? Or what kind of changes do you think you'd make?
I don't think I'd make any changes. I think it's a constantly evolving thing. And there's a whole group of people out there that are 100% committed to the continued growth and development of the program. And so when I'm lucky enough to work with some of them, not on the ICP specifically, more in some wider organizational things. But the work, the level of research, the level of work that goes behind this, I feel like I think it's in good hands, and I think it will continue to evolve and develop because the world's constantly changing. We can always be better. If I could wave a wand, it just really to I don't know, just be able to give people the same understanding of what it's about that I have. My understanding is not perfect. I still make mistakes from time to time. We always say that we're always striving to be 100% in implementation, but there's always something new to do. It took us a little while to get the new kids warm up put in, for example, because trying to look at the resistance you have against that and trying to make sure that we can do that in the right way. But if I could raise, I think it would be to open people's eyes to the benefits of implementing things in that way. I think that'd be it. Because a lot of the conversations I have and the problems that people have is because they're implementing in a different way.
If I could give you a big megaphone, you could speak to all the Gracie Barra students in the UK or the world. What do you think you would tell them? Either you can leave the question there, or if you need it, what do you think you tell them in terms of what GB is and the benefits of being in GB as opposed to somewhere else?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think society is a funny thing. Community is something that I've thought about a lot. I live in an apartment building in Nottingham. I know the people from the management company because I have to deal with them. I don't really know my neighbours very well. And that's symptomatic, I think, of a lot of communities that we have where when I was a kid growing up, in the Stone Age, I love the way kids today call it the late 1900s. Yeah. When I was growing up in the late 1900s, we'd have street parties and people would get together and the kids would play in the street and be a lot friendlier, but we just don't see things in the same way in communities. The one thing that you get, and it doesn't matter whether it's Gracie Barra or whether it's any, jiu-jitsu school, there's some great teams in the UK and some people that are pouring their hearts into developing a great environment, but what we're providing is a community. People get to know each other. They come together over a common interest and they make friends. One thing I find really nice is it's when the parents get together and have a parents' night out. And these are the parents of kids that have been in our school for years. They've got to know each other. They've sat on the side. Half of them are training now. And they all go out and they have a nice meal together and they've built these bonds of friendship that they wouldn't have probably had before because these kids were at different years in school, at different schools and everything else. And that's what we've managed to create. And I think that's, for me, probably the biggest benefit of being part of a jiu-jitsu community, whether it's Gracie Barra or anyone else, is that. It's the community. And it can be hugely supportive.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest values whenever we, again, hear back from members and stuff where they're like, the reason why people start to train and the reason people continue training are often quite different. Yeah. And that community always comes up. Something we focus on and I want to do an even better job of in the future with GBRL. In terms of the value of doing jiu-jitsu, I think it's if it was a commodity, I think it's very valuable. But something I've noticed when I travel is that in general, jiu-jitsu is very cheap in the UK compared to, in terms of membership prices, compared to even when I've been in places like Thailand and especially the States. How come in the UK we price less than the rest of the world, do you think it is?
This is a wild stab in the dark. I think that there's two things at play. One is undervaluing the service that we offer. I think that's part of it. The other part of it is, so I think, when I look at the service that schools provide, whether it's my school, your school, or another school, very often they underprice. And at the end of the day, you've got to know where you sit in the market. And I think people, they try to make it as accessible as possible. What happens very often, they end up with a very busy room, but an unsustainable business. And so these are the two things you've got to be able to play. I think very often when you go abroad, if you're looking in the US and things, a lot of schools, they're run by experienced black belts, but they're also, have a business head on their shoulders very often. And they started teaching for the love of it, and they wanted to spread jiu-jitsu. But I think that business sort of orientated mindset comes in, and there's plenty of people in this country and in Europe as well that have the the same approach. But sometimes I think people get into it for the love of it and almost feel bad charging.
Yeah.
But then you're into more of this wider thing of the environment that you're working in, because jiu-jitsu is not the only thing that's been undercharged for. There's an awful lot of other things that kids specifically can do, because we generally have a tendency to undercharge for the kids versus the adults if you're looking at it.
Yeah,
and
I've seen. I think it was Atos UK, Atos not UK, HQ.
Yeah.
I was looking at their prices, and they charge the same for adults and kids.
It's the same in a lot of Gracie Barra schools in the US as well. They'll charge the same price for kids and adults, and it's one of these things that, let's look at the reality of it. What does it take to teach a room full of adults? One person.
Yeah,
maybe two if you're feeling that your class is getting a bit big and you need to be able to make sure everyone's being managed. If I'm teaching a room full of kids, let's take 3 and 4-year-old kids. If I have 10 3 and 4-year-old kids, the answer is very simple. I need a coach per pair to help to corral those little nutters. And that's the reality. So the cost of delivering a class for kids is significantly more expensive than the cost of delivering a class for an adult, but yet we undervalue the service that we provide.
Yeah, we almost have it backwards in a way at GBRL, where LC1, which is our busiest program and requires the most in terms of adult and kid coaches to run it at good ratios, is like the second cheapest after Tiny Champions, So, but then as you go up, we don't need as many coaches for the juniors, but a junior will pay more for their membership than a LC1, even if they're doing the same amount of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, so I flat rated the cost for my kids' classes.
I think that's what we're
a few years ago. Yeah, and obviously, the older kids get the benefit of advanced kids classes and everything else, and competition classes, but it all comes as part of a single fee. And as time goes on, one day maybe I'd like to see the prices being the same. It would be the right thing to do, because the cost for us of providing those kids classes is just so much more expensive. But baby steps. But yeah, it is interesting. But then there's a stigma as well, and I think I was talking to my brother actually about this today, because there's a lot of martial arts organizations out there that it's very hard even to put a pin on what they're actually teaching the kids, because it's, that they often talk about being a blend of martial arts and things like this. But when someone first steps into the program, it's like, well, it's going to be £40 a month. It's going to be £60 a month for your child to attend X number of classes. But very, very quickly, they're into paying for belts. And, I'm sorry, I can't give your child that belt. You have to go to this next guy. And by the way, he costs double. And before you know it, you've got a child and a parent on a journey, which is going to cost thousands and thousands of pounds to get a child a black belt. And that's the bit I really struggle with, but it's that reputation. I've had people to show up at my school, and in the second they ask, are there any hidden costs or any hidden costs, I know why they're asking the questions. And very often it's because they've come from somewhere else where they've been taken advantage of, basically. And for me in my school, there's one set fee. Occasionally we run kids seminars, but it's optional. They don't have to come. We like to make a big thing about kids getting promoted and adults getting promoted. But the thing is, if they don't come to the seminar, they're still going to get promoted the next week. But we're not charging for belts or anything like that. So that, every single promotion picture you see on Instagram, which you're probably getting bored of seeing on my Instagram, of the kids with a new grey and white belt or a grey belt around the waist, that's not cost the family any money. They pay a membership, they're in the school, and, at the end of the day, that child's worked very, very hard to get that belt, and they deserve it.
Yeah. We're running low on time. There's a few more things I wanted to talk about. CompNet, and it's probably a good one to talk about. Yeah. I feel like, and it's some things that a few parents have said to me, that we stick the kids in some of these competitions, and they go against kids and they've got the same belt level, let's just say a solid grey belt, but the difference in ability is insane. Like some of these kids would probably beat, me, if they were a tiny bit bigger, so it's, CompNet seems to be one of the, and it's a bit of a project, just a bit of a passionate project, project you're passionate about. Yeah. Tell us a bit about CompNet
Okay, so I think the idea behind it is that there's two sides of this. Where the whole idea of CompNet came from was how they used to pick the squad that used to go out and represent Gracie Barra. So, you've got all these seriously talented individuals that want to go out and they want to represent. And you had the Gracie Barra A team, the Gracie Barra B team. At the black belt level in the World Championships or the Pan American Championships or the Euros, you can have 2 individuals from each team in each division. So you have an A team and a B team. So you can have up to 4 people represent in a division. And it was a big deal. It was a real accolade. And the way people were picked is through training camps, through the best of the best coming together and training against each other. And Master Carlos picking those people. Other people can tell you the history of that and the story of that far better than I can. Victor might be a good one for that, by the way. Future podcast, maybe. And so that's part of it. So when we look at things like our ambassadors program, this was an opportunity to bring the best of our Gracie Barra schools together and to compete against each other and with the best of the team rising to the top and having the benefit of being a supported athlete through the process. That was part of it. But the other part of it for me was to try to really bring the values of Gracie Barra to a competition environment. I want parents and I want, kids and I want adult students to come to a competition and have a great time and have a really positive experience. And so that's what we've tried to do is we've tried to embody the Gracie Barra values within that competition environment. The way that we look after people, the way we deal with people during the day, how we look after everyone and how we bring, our approach to our curriculums and how we teach into that competition environment was what it was all about. So that people can have a really good experience. I've been to a lot of competitions over the years, some very professional, some not so much. And some of the things I've heard and some of the things I've seen and, some of these competitions, there's kids everywhere and people are, screaming and shouting and swearing. And
sometimes I think like parents could use like a code of conduct, like just on the sidelines of what.
Where I'd say the level of competition on the mats at a competition is as high as any competition there is in the country, or in the world. But it's the environment that the competition is happening in is a much different place. And to me, that's hugely important because, I'd like, for me, the whole idea about growing CompNet is, the whole idea is we're going to be growing this across Europe. It's growing around the world as we speak. We've got a global league and it's that opportunity for people within our organization to come together and to compete against each other and to test themselves. But test themselves in a nice environment. Yeah. And then, and then you can go out to the IBJJF competitions, to the AJP and the other big competitions. And you've basically got the benefit of competing against, a good level of people. Nice. And it sets yourself up. So, yeah.
All right. Last question. Is there a very memorable piece of advice that you've gotten from Victor that's stuck with you for a long time?
From Victor. I spent so much time winding him up. I'm sure there's been a lot of positive advice during this time. I think, Did he give you any advice when you got your black belt or anything like that as well? Or? No. It is, I think he and I have known each other for such a long time. There's always conversations. He always has a good way of viewing the world. I can be a bit, we have very different minds. I'm a lot more analytical and much more in the weeds at times, and he can see the bigger picture. And he does have a way of making you look at things in a different way. And I think he was always very supportive along my journey. Mostly as a school owner, I'd say, where Victor was the most supportive because he'd been doing it for so many years. And I used to get, the amount of times I'd get, find something difficult, and he just had a way of kind of soothing it down and letting me see things in a way that was productive. And so I can't think of one individual piece of advice because he's helped so many times along the way and been so supportive. It's been, I think, a long-term project for that poor man dealing with me. And so it's not one piece of advice, it's an awful lot of advice.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Professor Simon. I really appreciate your time. I know you're insanely busy. So
thanks so much, Steve.
Thanks for coming on.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Us.